Hey there, Blue Rockers. It's time once again for Stan's Bible Class. I'm your host, Stan Larimer. This is a Connie Willis production, and we are doing a lesson now that has nothing to do with any other lesson that we've done before. I think some of you are going to like it. Big Connie Willis fans, used to some of the incredible things she likes to talk about. Well, today we're going to talk about those kind of things that are covered in the Bible. And that means all kinds of strange creatures and supernatural stuff that you just tend to skim over when you're reading the Bible, and you don't maybe connect all the dots to understand what it's telling you about how the real universe works, how God's creation works. And so I'm going to share with you a lot of stuff and maybe answer some of your questions as we go along. Certainly, one of the questions I want to answer, Connie, if you would take us off the picture of Goliath, which is maybe one giant people have actually heard, the David and Goliath story, but he was not a unique person. There are lots of giants in the Bible. But if we go to the next slide, I just went out on the internet and grabbed up a lot of comments there that you can kind of look at. And, it's basically a question a lot of people have is, why is God so severe? They say, wait a minute, God's often ordering people, especially in the Old Testament, to go wipe out entire civilizations, and that doesn't sound very nice, and certainly not the type of thing we would expect from God, not the kind of behavior he expects from us. So why do we find God coming along and doing rather severe things like flooding the whole planet and killing off all mankind except for 8 people? It's a question that people ask, but that's basically the same God who came, took on human form, and died for us on the cross, a most painful death, so that he could take our punishment and let us into heaven using his own righteousness instead of ours. So, that just tells us God's a lot more complicated being than we are, and we don't necessarily understand everything. But today I'm going to tell you what the Bible says about that may help you understand. And I'm going to start out by saying something that might help you understand. Nobody out there objects when a farmer goes out and weeds his garden. Okay? And, you say that's a big difference between selecting one type of plant that gets to stay in your garden and another type of plant that is going to be kicked out of your garden. But when you're God and you've done all of creation, you've got a lot more responsibility than just for plants. You're trying to produce a good crop of children that you're going to extract from an environment that separates the sheep from the goats, if you'll pardon my mixed metaphor here. So the idea of God weeding his garden is something that we have to take seriously. And that means weeding out one type of human in order to support the thriving of another type of human. And one is children of God and one is children of Satan. That's one way Jesus describes it. Another way Jesus describes it is his parable of the wheat and the tares. And he talks about how an evil person has sown, an enemy has sown tares, which are just sort of like fake wheat, into a guy's field. And they've grown up together, and he can't weed them out without pulling up the wheat at the same time. And so he lets them grow together for a while until harvest comes. And then he cuts them down and burns the tares and keeps the wheat. So we have lots of examples where this is talked about. But today, I'm going to give you some amazing information from all over the Bible. Before I get you lost in the weeds by showing you the verses that prove what I am saying to you, let me see if I can just give it to you, the too long didn't read kind of summary of it. And, it'll probably shock you without the biblical support, but I'll give you that in a second pass. You may have read and remember the verse that said in Revelation that war broke out in heaven. And basically 1/3 of the angels rebelled against God and were cast out with Satan. And it just sort of says that matter-of-factly and moves on. And you say, whoa, when did this war break out in heaven? And what happened? What caused them to be cast out? And we sort of hear that, but don't put it into context. Well, today you're going to hear it in context. It goes clear back to the time 5,000 years ago, something on the order of maybe 1,500 years, 500 to 1,500 years after Adam, leading up to the time of the Great Flood. And something that happened at that time when some of those angels, and this is incredible in its own right, decided that human females were good looking and wanted to mate with them. And they did it, for their own lustful reasons, but they also did it because they wanted to pollute God's genetic line that leads from Adam to Jesus with their own genetics. And apparently a lot of that kind of stuff was going on, as I will show you, to the point where the Bible says right before it describes the flood that all flesh had been corrupted. Now, when I read that, I just thought, well, okay, all flesh has been corrupted. Everybody's become evil. But it appears to be a lot more than that. It appears to be that there was, if you can believe it, for that time in history, genetic modifications being done to God's creation, which didn't make him very happy. And he decided that he was going to take action that would wipe out all of the corrupted genetics that had been put in there by these fallen angels. And those angels who did it on purpose are now, the Bible tells us, cast into a pit where they are being severely punished so severely that the rest of the angels were absolutely aghast at what had happened to these people who had messed with God's creation. And so that, believe it or not, and quite a lot of what you might say is God's actions, especially his commands to the Israelites to wipe out certain people and not wipe out other people. And it had to do with the genetic makeup of those people, where he said, leave no man, woman, or child along. I always read that and said, well, yeah, he goes on to say, because they'll teach you other gods and lead you away from me. So, don't let them survive. But that wouldn't really explain the extermination of children either. But genetic corruption would. And I will show you what the Bible has to say about certain people living in the land of Canaan who had some of this modified genetic makeup. And of course, a lot of what I'm doing right now is translating into modern language. The Bible doesn't know anything or say anything about DNA or genetics or gene splicing or doing experimental crossbreeding between different species, but it describes the effects of that. And so we're going to look at all this stuff. And I guess my meta message of it is that the world is much more complex than you would think, and the Bible contains so much information that you really do have to study it, because what I'm going to show you, you'd never pull out on your own. You just read along and say, oh, there's another one of those Bible statements about some giant, or satyrs, which are half horse and half man. That sounds like a mythological thing. What's it doing in the middle of the Bible, which Jesus told us that we should believe? He said, you believe Moses, and he wrote about me. If you can't believe what he wrote, then how can you believe what I say? So this is coming right out of the things Moses wrote about, and Jesus said we should believe. So, if that doesn't explode your mind, I don't know what will, but let's just jump into it a little bit here. And Connie, if we could have the next slide. And we'll just start out with this slide I'm on is number 3. And it's Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 to 4. And this is the Lord giving instructions to wipe out specific groups of people in the land of Canaan, modern-day Israel, whenever they moved into the territory. This is one of those passages that just horrifies people today when they read it. But note how he's mentioning specific groups. And those are descendants of specific people. And when we look at where they descended from and what their genetic makeup was, suddenly it becomes clear why God may have made such a severe commandment. But without any further ado, I'll just read it here for you so we can sort of enjoy it together or marvel at it. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess and drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you, and when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you, and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them, and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods. And the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. Okay, so in the past when I've read that, I just sort of thought, well, yeah, they have false gods. Don't want you intermingling among them. They'll teach you a bunch of stuff, and you'll wind up worshiping false gods, and that's going to really irritate me. So it turns out there's a lot more to it than that. Connie, if we can have the next slide. This is also from Deuteronomy, and it's kind of interesting. I would like you to remember the word Anak, A-N-A-K. Okay, he is the leader of the Anakim, which is a race of giants, one of the first giants. Okay, so we're not talking about just Goliath. We're talking about a whole lot that are the sons of Anak. Let's read what it says in Deuteronomy about this. The Emim lived therein before the great and numerous people, and tall as the Anakim. They were also giants, like sons of Anak, and the Moabites called them Emitas. For only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the rest of the giants. Is not his bed a bed of iron in Rabbath of the children of Ammon? The length thereof is 9 cubits, and the breadth is 4 cubits, according to the elbow of a man. So the length of a man's forearm, maybe 18 inches or something. You got basically a foot and a half. So something that's 9 cubits is going to be 13 or 14 feet. So this guy's bed was 13 or 14 feet long, and apparently on display in the town of Rabbah at the time this was discussed. So we're talking about the fact that at this time, it was not uncommon to see giants. They were all over the land of Canaan, and even to the point of being recognized as specific tribes and races that shared that same common genetic characteristic of being giants in the eyes of everybody who we would call normal today. The next slide. Okay. And so it goes on to say, so the Lord our God also gave into our hands Og, king of Bashan, and all his army. We struck them down, leaving no survivors. At that time we took all his cities. There was not one of the 60 cities that we did not take from them. The whole region of Argob, Og's kingdom in Bashan, all these cities were fortified with high walls and with gates and bars, and there were also a great many unwalled villages. We completely destroyed them as we had done with Sihon, king of Heshbon, destroyed every city, men, women, and children, but all the livestock and the plunder from their cities we carried off for ourselves. Well, folks, that's called genocide, and most people today looking at that would be horrified of it, and yet what Moses is reporting here is that they obeyed the Lord and actually did do this complete purging. That's really bad if, I suppose, you are purging fellow humans. But if you are purging giants that constitute an existential threat, then maybe you can understand it. And especially if God says these giants came into existence because my fallen angels, the ones who rebelled, the ones we would call today demons, have gone down and mated with the women down there and produced these half-breeds that are extremely more powerful, strong, and became the famous and renowned men of old, the kind of men that legends are written about, except that the Bible tells us, no, these are not made-up myths. This is what really happened, and this is what Moses wrote down, and Jesus told us to believe. So hold on to your horses, because this is going to get intense. Okay, let's look at another picture. This is a description from Numbers 13. I just wanted to give you an idea of the scale of these giants. Okay, the so-called sons of Anak, one of the original giants that the Bible speaks about. And in Numbers it says, we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. And so on this scale drawing here, you see a 6-foot-tall man. And then along the bottom there, Og of Bashan is described to be, well, somebody who slept on a bed that was apparently 9 cubits long. So, you know, you're going to find something 13 or so. So he was around 12 feet, somewhere in that category tall. And, of course, that's also similar to the scale that Goliath is described to be in. He was a Philistine that the Philistine army sent out against King Saul. David defeated him with a slingshot by trusting in God to guide that shot right to the giant's forehead, and then he beheaded him. But, you know, that's about the only giant story I ever heard about when I was growing up. But now as I started looking into this, they're described all over the place. In Amos, chapter 2, verse 9, it's talking about the early Canaanite giants were as tall as cedars, which puts them in the 24 to 36 foot range. So these guys were running around out there, and you know, when God ordered the Israelites to go into these lands and wipe out those races, he's talking about big people. It was a pretty tough assignment. So you know, you can imagine that under that circumstances, living in high pagan, populated by people who could crush you with their bare hands, you know, it puts it in a little bit of different light as far as whether that was a just order. Of course, coming from God, of course it was a just order, but I'm merely trying to help you understand what God may have been thinking when he gave such a command. And we should never criticize God just because we don't understand the rationale behind something. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And, you know, he knows better than we do what things should remain in his garden and what things should be weeded. Okay, Connie, if we can go to the next slide. And another excerpt from Numbers. And this is about the time when, you know, God had brought the Israelites out of Egypt and had taken them fairly directly, ready to enter into what's modern-day Israel. And they sent out scouts to scout the land, you know, 12 guys to go out and see what was in there, tell them, you know, what the strengths and weaknesses were of the enemies that they were supposed to go conquer. And they came back, and this is what is reported that they told everybody. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak. Remember, those are the giants that we've seen mentioned elsewhere. And the Amalekites live in the Negev, and the Hittites, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea along the Jordan, which is pretty much between the Jordan and the sea is modern-day Israel, or at least the West Bank. And so those were populated by Canaanites at the time. Then Caleb, who was one of the 12, and you'll notice he was one that wasn't chicken. Joshua and Caleb were the only two members of this group who actually were allowed to live long enough to enter the promised land. Everybody else had to wander for 40 years in the wilderness after they chickened out from taking on these giants. Anyhow, Caleb earned his ticket to the promised land by taking the following attitude. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report, and the land they had explored. And they said, the land we explored devours those living in it. And all the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, who are the descendants of Anak that come from the Nephilim. And we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Remember that word, Nephilim. Nephilim is, in fact, going to be told to us in a few minutes, the offspring of the sons of God intermarrying with the daughters of men to produce men of renown, the Nephilim, half-breeds, giants. So keep in mind that we're going to see that Nephilim word come up again. But at the time, Moses and the Israelites knew very well who the Nephilim were and what that all involved. And we've sort of lost that these days because a lot of people say, well, maybe Goliath was just somebody like Shaquille O'Neal. No, these guys were fundamentally different. They were just not the biggest specimens in the human race. They were half-breed of intermingling of genetics between angels and men, which is another interesting thought, too. If you think angels are spiritual beings, then you might ask the question, how could they intermarry with human females? So, there's a lot of stuff going on here that, we tend to not think about, but the Bible's got a lot of goodies in there that help us understand the way things really are. And so I hope you get a lot of stuff out of this particular lesson, because it's one of my most mind-blowing topics. Okay, Connie, next slide. Now, Stan, where'd you get all this stuff? Well, I admit I didn't do all this research. There's a couple books out there, one by Douglas Hamp called Corrupting the Image, and another by Tom and Anita Horn that is called Forbidden Gates. And Corrupting the Image is talking about the deliberate attempt by the rebellious angels, the demons that were cast out of heaven, who came to earth with the intention of messing up God's creation by genetically altering it, both by intermarrying with human females and by doing experimental genetic alterations on lots of other creatures in God's world. And Forbidden Gates is talking about the passing of spiritual beings between this world and the spiritual world, which apparently is a lot more physical than we might give it credit for. So these books go and quote lots of Bible stuff, and they offer their theories of what that all means when you pull it all together. I need to say right here that the words I'm quoting to you from the Bible are inspired and reliable. That doesn't mean my interpretation of them and how they're strung together to create what I'm telling you today, or the people that wrote these books' interpretation is right. We could have got it wrong. We could look at those facts and say, yeah, it sure seems to me like they were messing around with DNA. The Bible doesn't say that, but wow, they really are corrupting the image of God. Remember, man is made in God's own image, and it was desired by Satan to screw up God's plan for salvation of mankind by interfering every way possible with us getting down through from Adam to Jesus. And certainly, since Jesus was supposed to be descended from Adam through David, if they could mess up the image before it even got to King David, and therefore before it got to Jesus, then they would maybe thwart God's plan. And so the history that we see accounted in the Bible is part of this never-ending battle between good and evil. One might ask, why does God tolerate it? He's able to throw those guys into the pit where they're being tormented to this day. Why didn't he do it before they corrupted the image? I don't know. He must have made rules for himself that said, I'm not going to interfere. I'm going to allow things to happen, and I will judge that, but not necessarily interfere with it, although he clearly does. There are examples where Satan said and complained to God, you put a hedge around Job, so I can't touch him. Of course he loves you. So apparently God does protect some things in his creation, but apparently he also allows catastrophic modifications to what's going on done by his angelic beings. And who knows why? He makes his own rules. We'll have to wait and maybe find that out in the future. So I'm going to show you more verses from the Bible, and I'm going to tell you what it seems to mean to me, and what these authors seem to think it meant. And you draw your own conclusions, but do not think that these theories are inspired, just the words from which the theories are derived. And with that, proceed at your own risk. We're going to go look at some more really cool stuff out of the Bible. Okay. We get to 2 Samuel, and we find the story of Goliath of the Philippines and David's winning the battle against Goliath. But did you know Goliath had brothers? Let's look at this and see if you don't find this fascinating. And there was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines, where Ethanian, the son of Jeroboam, a Bethlehemite, slew the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, the staff of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. So the brother of Goliath was also a giant. Okay, and therefore we start to say, well, that certainly sounds genetic. And there was yet a battle in Gath, where there was a man of great stature that had on every hand 6 fingers, and on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number. And he also was born to the giant. So there's another example of genetic mutation taking place. They had extra fingers and toes. Isn't that interesting? And when he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimea, the brother of David, slew him. These 4 were born to the giant in Gath, and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. Once again, we go blowing right by that, but if you don't have this little theory we're entertaining, you might not think too much about that. After all, we do see people who have genetic defects all the time, so it's not necessarily surprising that somebody would have 6 fingers and 6 toes. And in fact, next slide, Connie. Those of you who have seen The Avengers and know Halle Berry may be surprised to learn that she has 6 toes. So, some of those genetics are still around even to this day. Next. Okay, now we get to the, kind of like core thing. This is the first one I discovered. The rest were pointed out to me from these other books, but, this is pretty strong stuff. This is from Genesis chapter 6. That's where in the middle of it, God instructs Noah to build an ark and tells him that there's going to be a flood and that he's about to wipe out all life on earth. And so let's look at the particular verse right before God says he's going to do the great flood. And it says, "And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. And they took them wives of all which they chose." Okay? The sons of God, that's the angels, saw the daughters of men were fair, and they intermarried with them. And, sometimes these particular sons of God are also referred to as the watchers. They're fallen angels. I think their job was supposed to be, to keep an eye on what's happening on God's creation, but they, instead of doing their job, started messing with it with the explicit intention of polluting the bloodline that leads to Jesus. Next slide. And here's a very famous statue that is basically, I'm pretty convinced is referring to this particular event that is in the Bible, whoever the sculptor was. And it refers to the Nephilim. Remember, I told you to remember that word? The fallen ones. And here's what it says. This continues on from the previous verse in Genesis. And it says, "There were giants in the earth in those days." Note that plural, giants. "And also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown." So, which were of old. men of renown. So these are the legendary, Ben-Hurs, Atlases, whatever that we hear about in Greek mythology, except that they're not made up. The Bible tells us they were real, and their origins was the mating of the sons of God with daughters of men. And that led to very powerful beings who were viewed as giants by the rest of us. And so right there in plain print in a book of Moses that Jesus told us we should believe is an incredible bombshell that I'm sharing with you today. Let's keep on going. Okay, so I'm going to just stop off because, just in case you think this is all Old Testament kind of stuff, we're going to look at one of Jesus' disciples, Jude, who talks about the sons of God or angels, and he talks about what happened to these guys after they messed up God's creation like that. They didn't get off scot-free. But he's sitting right here telling us about this same thing. You got to piece all this together to figure out what happened. And the angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of that just great day. Let's think about that for a minute. I told you that he cast them into a pit after that, where they are being held in torment until the final day of judgment, when all creation gets judged. Then they'll be taken out of this torment and cast into the lake of fire. But in the meantime, they're there as an example to all angels about what happens when you rebel. And the angels were quite aghast at the severity of the punishment. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they, in the same way as these, indulged in gross immorality and went after strange flesh, are exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. Yet in the same way, these men also by dreaming defile the flesh and reject authority and revile angelic majesties. So woven right into Jude's sermon that he's addressing to men is these bombshell facts that he could have only gotten from Jesus in terms of understanding what had happened here. Talks about the fact that they went after strange flesh. They were doing interbreeding kind of things, and that they were punished with eternal fire. So people who say, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I don't believe in hell, I'm sorry, but that is not consistent with what Jesus and his disciples taught, and the angels were not exempt from that kind of punishment. Next. Okay, so that was Jude, and of course, you may not remember that Jude was one of the disciples, but you certainly know Peter, and here's what Peter had to say about the same event. He says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment, and he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, and if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by reducing them to ashes, having made them an example to those who would live ungodly lives thereafter, and if he rescued righteous Lot, oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men, or by what they saw and heard, that righteous man, when living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge the flesh in corrupt desires and despise authority." And there, my friends, may be the single biggest run-on sentence in the Bible. But you get the idea that what he's saying here is he's talking about this same event that happened with the Nephilim back in this period of time when those angels who did that thing were punished for what they did, at the same time, of course, as all those interbreeding experiments they were doing were wiped out in the Great Flood. Okay, next. Just so you get an idea, I mean, this is all over the Bible, so read your Bible, you'll understand things better. But this is from the book of Job, and it's talking about, right at the very beginning, we sort of get a behind the scenes of what's going on in heaven before we get into the story of what happened to Job. But it says, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Okay? So, sons of God refers to angels, which included Satan, who was, one of the chief angels before he sinned and was cast out. So, the word sons of God in this context is referring to the angels. Now, one day we'll be children of God. Okay, but when you see sons of God, not son of God, that's a special title for Jesus. But sons of God, that's an expression that describes the angels. And we're told that Satan was among them. So these were the beings that were intermarrying with human females. Okay, we go to the next one. And we're back in Genesis 6, looking at what it says after it tells us about how the earth got corrupted. And it goes on to say, the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence, and through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. And then it goes on to give him the instructions to build an ark. So he's going to fill it with genetically pure specimens and take it to the other side of the flood and start over again, having wiped out as much as possible the genetic modifications that had been done by these Nephilim during the previous 1,000 years. This is not something that just happened real quickly. This happened during the lifespan of one of Noah's ancestors, and he lived to be almost 1,000 years old. So there's a long period of time during which this kind of stuff was going on until God had it and decided to do something about it. So let's go on to slide 17, Connie. Given how the flood started. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were open, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And the selfsame day entered Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his son with him into the ark. They and every other beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, and every bird of every sort. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, and two of all flesh, wherein the breath of life. And they went in, and male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. So this is emphasizing that he was bringing in pairs of genetically pure creatures who correctly represented their kind to be taken through the flood and to survive to replenish the earth. Next slide. Now, I'm going to go off into a few other verses that are books that are not in the Bible, but they're what we might call synchronized, biblically endorsed, extra-biblical texts. Okay, so they're not viewed as inspired, but they are viewed as consistent and often referenced from the Bible, indicating that they are, quote-unquote, endorsed as being, valid texts to look at, not necessarily inspired, but certainly to the extent that they talk about the same events, they may give us additional information, and that's what the synchronized part of that is, that these tell the same story in the same sequence, but filled in a little more detail. So I don't usually use stuff outside the Bible, but we're going to look at a little bit of these extra detail here. You take it with a grain of salt as to whether we should be using uninspired text to illuminate things. But to the extent that you do, I think that you may find it interesting. So I'll grant myself an exception for these purposes. So this is what is starting out with God talking to Noah before the flood. He says, "And thou shalt choose for thy sons 3 maidens from the daughters of men, and they shall be wives to thy sons." And Noah rose up and made the ark in the place where God had commanded him. And Noah did as God had ordered him. In his 595th year, Noah commenced to make the ark. And he made the ark in 5 years as the Lord had commanded. I've always wondered how long it took him to build that ark. It seemed to me like it'd probably take 100 years. But no, he did it in 5 years. Quite amazing. Then Noah took the 3 daughters of Eliakim, son of Methuselah, who is Noah's grandfather. So these are like distant cousins, for wives for his son, as the Lord had commanded Noah. And it was at this time that Methuselah, Noah's grandfather, the son of Enoch, died at the age of 960 years old, which I think is the oldest person recorded in the Bible. And Methuselah, his name means something like, when he dies, it will end. Which is kind of amazing that almost 1,000 years before, when he was named, he was given a name that predicted he would die just before the end, whatever that was. So, the Bible's full of these little surprises as you go along. If we go to the next slide, 19, and I'll just remind you the parable of the weeds from Matthew chapter 13. This is Jesus. I talked to you about it a little bit earlier, but let's just read what Jesus said. "The owner's servants came to him and said, 'Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?' 'An enemy did this,' he replied. So the servants asked him, 'Do you want us to go and pull them up?' 'No,' he said, 'if you pull up the weeds now, you might uproot the wheat with them.'" Jesus' parable here is reflecting back to this big event, right? And our status today is we've got God's children intermingled among children of Satan, and they are like weeds, and we don't know who's who, so we treat everybody like they're a potential child of God. But we know that some of them are weeds placed there by Satan, and this has been part of his strategy for a long time, and goes clear back to the events I'm talking about right now. Next. Okay, we continue back in Genesis 6 again. And as the Lord continues to say what he's going to do, "I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing and the fowls of the air, for I regret that I have made them." But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Just that part right there, it's interesting that, you would think that if it was just a moral problem with humans, that he'd only feel the need to wipe out humans. He could have done that with a plague or something. But no, he wiped out every creeping thing. So something had gone drastically wrong with the genetics of his creation. And the Bible tells us that that was probably induced by these fallen angels in using whatever technology they may have had available to them. Anyhow, it goes on to say something fascinating. "These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God." Now, when I've read that before in the past, I'd go right by it, and it said, "Noah was a just man, perfect in his generation, and Noah walked with God," as if it was describing that Noah was, a perfectly good man. It doesn't say perfect in his generation, as among all the people alive at that time, he was perfect. It says perfect in his generations. What does that mean? It means he was genetically unmodified through all his generations back to Adam. He was perfect. That's one of the reasons why Noah was eligible for this job, is because his lineage had not had any modifications done to it, while other people had intermarried with Nephilim of different types and been part of various genetic modifications or alterations, or who knows what had gone on to corrupt all flesh. But somehow Noah and his ancestors had escaped that. And of course, that tells us why Noah selected from descendants of his grandfather Methuselah for the 3 wives. But we'll find out that that was not necessarily a successful move, because they were not perfect in their generations. they had other ancestors that led to some of the things I'm going to show you afterwards. So Noah had 3 sons, and since he was perfect in his generations, we assume that Shem, Ham, and Japheth were also genetically pure. But they had 3 wives who may have brought in a little bit of the genetics that led to the giants we find post-flood that we've read about, that Moses encountered in the land of Canaan. That's where they came from in this little process. As always, it's the women's fault, right? Okay, so I just got a disgusted look from Connie there. Okay, so I'm going to just show you a little chart here that talks about Joah was a just man, perfect in his generations. And so this is showing us from information given to us straight out of Moses' writings in the Bible that are inspired and Jesus said we should believe. The generations down from Adam. You'll recognize some of these names, right? Adam had first 2 sons, Cain and Abel. One killed the other, and Cain ran off. And so the third, or later, son, Seth, is the one that survived to breed. And he had his first child, Enosh, at age 130 and lived 912 years. And it goes down through Enosh and Canaan and on down till we get to somebody named Jared, who's just 6 generations or so removed from Adam. He lived 962 years, and he was born in the year 460 since creation. Then we go through Enoch and Methuselah, the grandfather of Noah, Lamech, his father, and Noah. And it shows here that Noah lived 950 years, and we're told that at age 600 is when the flood occurred. So I put in that little dotted line there. We're also told that Methuselah, his grandfather, died just before the flood. And so that dotted line is the time of the flood. And before that were the Nephilim. And we're told that when those Nephilim did their nasty deeds and modifications of flesh, and we can read in the book of Enoch, which is once again non-biblical but synchronized account of what happened. And they, the fallen angels, were in all 200 who descended in the days of Jared. Remember, Jared is Methuselah's grandfather, so 4 generations, 962 time in the days of Jared, during that period of time, on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. Okay, so these angels descended onto that mountain and then proceeded to wreak havoc for the next up to 1,000 years, till they had corrupted all flesh and led to the creation of giants as tall as cedars. And we'll see that there were other genetic experiments that apparently are acknowledged in the Bible. Satyrs, half horse and half man, I guess, are one such example. And they're mentioned in Isaiah. So how did Isaiah know about that? This is not all Greek mythology. This is pointing back to weird stuff that was happening that the Bible agrees did happen. Next. Okay, let's look at a little bit of genetic stuff here. If we look at the sons of Noah and their descendants, we find from various places in the Bible some interesting facts. Noah had 3 sons. In the descendants of Japheth, there were giants. In the descendants of Ham, we can look at one of his sons was Canaan, and from them the Canaanites, which we know had giants. Mizraim had 1 giant. We don't know about Put. And Cush had a descendant named Nimrod from the famous Tower of Babel, who it says became a giant. And whether he modified his own genetics or how he did that, but it's mentioned there. So Ham did have some descendants who
Hold on for 1 second. They're saying no sound. So hold on here. So, you know what? I'm just going to hang up on you and bring you back in. It always works well when we do that. I think it just started at the one we're at now, which is 23. So I would start at 23. Okay, hold on here. See ya. Hey everybody, it's Connie, if you can hear me. Thanks for letting me know there's no sound, because I hear it through Skype, so I don't always get that. So I just hung up on his booty, and we will bring him back on. Thanks for all the questions that are coming. That's what I'm dealing with. And let's pull him back in. Pull my Skype up. There we go. I'll probably bring him right back in. Oh, yeah, you get to see me. No, good, you get Stan. All right, yay. All right, how you doing over there? You need a hat, dude. Well, what we did, well, you know, it's funny because during this show right now, you've been leaning in, so your face has like this shadow right around it, like a gray ET form around the front of your face, and the rest is all bright. So let me make sure everybody's got the sound. So does everybody now see Stan and hear Stan? Okay. No sound still. Teach me the ways. Hold on. We got that delay, so can you talk a little there, Stan? Oh, yeah. I don't have you. Yeah. I don't have your sound. I got you turned up. I see, but don't hear, not hearing. Okay, let's see. Yeah, maybe maybe you hang up and call me so we can set that up. Okay, all right. All right, you guys, we'll get this fixed. I'm glad that you're there to help. We got some really good questions coming in from people. About the Bigfoot stuff, so that's cool, and I appreciate that you guys do that too. So let me grab him. Here we go. Let me answer him here. Okay. Oh, there's me. Hi, everybody. Yep. Okay, you got me. I can, but let me see if they can. We'll go back to just you. Make sure we got this video. Skype, microphone. I got you turned up, so here. Picture's looking good again. I'm going to have you here. I'm going to turn you off over here. David, okay, so you guys let me know. Nope. Okay, I gotcha. It is an intermission. Everybody go get some popcorn. Okay. It says I've got you there. It says I've got you here. It says Skype is open, but okay, you guys here? Tell Stan I'm flying in tomorrow. Randy Fushauer, Stan Skeleton. Okay. I think that's somebody with cloud. Anybody got him? Good talk.
You guys here? Tell Stan I'm flying in tomorrow. Randy Fuchsia or Stan Skeleton. Anybody got him? Okay.
Huh, no. Is it, what were you using previously? Did your mic go off? Did it turn off? Did the battery go out?
Anybody got him?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, I'm going to hang up on it and call you right back. That's what I'm going to do. All right, we're going to refresh everybody on this app that I have, and then so hang in there. You may have to refresh your page, okay? You may have to refresh your page. All righty, let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to stop, and it's got everybody but you talking. Talk to me. No, hope not. You know what? I'm going to send them to you just to make sure, okay? Okay, talk to me. And your mic is on? You see it at the bottom of yours? Yeah, you have to, because I can hear you. Okay. All right. Everybody just be ready to refresh here in a minute. Quit eCam.